So we've covered movement. Later we'll talk about resistance, stance, maybe even sprinting. But let's talk about aerobics. And probably the single most misunderstood part of any fitness routine for anybody, aerobics. In what is it? What does it stand for? What's the difference between aerobics and cardiovascular? Is it the same thing? And so on. Let's start with you, Christian, because you spent 20, 30 years just studying this since obviously your football career, then your degrees in this area. Tell us what aerobics is, why should we do it, what's it good for, and what is aerobics?
Well, I mean, I suppose everybody's got a slightly different way of looking at this is sometimes the issue. But when I'm looking at aerobic system development, I'm looking at the way in which the body metabolizes energy aerobically and the intensity to which you would then move at in order to enhance the physiological processes that allow us to be able to move at certain intensities over a given time. Suppose that we look at this as being like, you can use it to track, you can use aerobic system work. If you track the development of aerobic system work, you can actually use it to track health status, and you can actually then use that to build endurance if you want to. So you can have a level of aerobic health and you can use it to build endurance. And from then on, you can potentially look to build capacity on top of that, which might be doing something more intense, for example, like that. So we go from more like an aerobic health to an endurance to a capacity type of scenario. That's what we tend to do. But building your aerobic system is at an intensity that's studying the literature and looking at the development of athletes studying the literature in terms of the physiology that underpins metabolic health, and also which looks at the condition of athletes. When I was looking at those two things, it was almost like the same things were happening. The same things that would reduce inflammation or increase the number and type of mitochondria you have, or increase the amount of autophagy, or would be allowed you to burn fat as a fuel source, etc., was sitting in these intensities that seemed to be much lower than the paces that people tend to be running at. Or it was a certain intensity that people could actually do lots of and never feel it was particularly tired.
Yeah.
But also on the other hand, when we're looking at some of the athletes that we're coaching, the ones who were spending the most time within those aerobic, we'd call it intensities, and let's say we define that as somewhere between 70 and 80% of your max heart rate, or let's say 80% and below of your max heart rate, they were the ones that seemed to be making the biggest adaptations to any form of intensity that was above that.
Yeah.
So that was really quite fascinating to see that. In fact, the ones who were spending more time performing aerobically or developing themselves aerobically were, even without any intensity, were actually outperforming people who did all intensity. So which we found really interesting, because you could do this stuff over long time spells.
Yeah.
And from then we saw this situation, whereas we realised that healthy athletes, which we mean by healthy aerobic systems, they're the ones that adapt. They're the ones who are able to adapt to any form of training and to any form of additional stress. Without that slight development in some way of just some kind of cardiovascular aerobic development, they'd seem to have poor adaptations.
So interesting, isn't it? Because I wrote my first book, Primal Cure, my first half book, that I really had to go running, and only from a N=1 point of view, in that when I started my business when I was 24, I stopped exercising as much. I used to do a lot of sailing, therefore I had to exercise for that. But I started the company at 24, and then exercise sort of fell away, and by the time I was 30, I was obese. So then I started to run, and I thought, well, running's what it's all about. Everybody says aerobics, and I go and run virtually every morning at silly o'clock. Didn't have enough sleep, but this is what I've got to do. And for 15 years, I ran most days, an hour, hard as anything. Because nobody said to me, go slow. It was hard as anything. I ended up with a knee operation and ended up putting on more weight, not losing the weight. And all because I thought I was doing aerobics, and what I was doing was the opposite. I'd gone past that zone, and on every metric, every time I went for annual medical, I was getting worse and worse and worse, and yet I was putting more and more effort in.
Well, there's more,
and therefore I write, don't run it stupid. Then I met you a year ago, and you said, well, don't write off running, start to train slower, and it's a game changer.
It's a game changer, but also, although there's a gradation in this type, it's not aerobic versus anaerobic, but what you're doing is we're training more anaerobically before. That's high stress. The more intense you make something, the more stress there is. And if you look, as we've spoken about before, is that the more intense something is, the lower your volume has to be. So you have to be very careful with intensity, because as soon as you're trying to train intensity and volume, that leads to all sorts of problems. It's too stressful, so you don't follow what we'd call a stress recovery adaptation cycle, so you don't adapt. You get to the stage where you keep doing that and nothing happens.
Yeah.
But as soon as you allow your system some time to adapt, so you're at an optimal intensity where you can actually give some sort of stress to the body, but it has time to adapt, then that's when the little game changer starts, and that's when you start to see all these long-term adaptations happen. And so that's what we've become really good at developing. The great thing about that, when you learn how to monitor that as well, though, is that what you see is you can actually track recovery. So it's a training system, you're training within those areas, but it's also a monitoring thing. So it can monitor, if you start to exercise at a given intensity and you're much slower that day, you're probably tired, or you could be coming down with an illness, or you've had a bad night's sleep, or you've been drinking alcohol, or you've eaten sugar, or whatever it is that is. So it allows you to determine things that you're doing within your life just by looking at this aerobic system. If you train high, you can't see it. You can't see it. So we have so many people that we see who can train high, and they would have a relationship between that high intensity, let's say 90%, and what they'd actually race, let's say, or perform at. But if you take them down to 75%, there's no relationship whatsoever. They've never developed it down there, and they're always vulnerable. They're always vulnerable to illnesses, to conditions, but developing down there, it's like a game changer for them, and you find they become very protective of this low intensity aerobic health base that sets the preconditions for all the other stresses that they do.
I think the easiest way to visually understand it is exactly what Christian's saying. So if you think of aerobic training as the base of a pyramid, and the wider you make that base, then the higher, the Egyptians had it right, the higher you can make that peak, because it's so stable. And you think the people who are really, all you do is train the top. It's almost like you invert the pyramid, and you've got the whole thing balancing on one point. It's never going. Even a kid would think it's better to have the pyramid that way up than that way up, because it's only going to crash. And if you haven't got that base, you've got no foundation. It's like building a house without any foundations. And again, a little bit more scientific. You have, on the screen, if you have your aerobic there, and you have your aerobic threshold, which is when you start produce lactic acid. But the first one is here, is your aerobic threshold. You produce lactic acid at a level that you can then reuse it as fuel. And then your next one is your anaerobic threshold. And that's the point of no return, because that's when it becomes really painful. Lactic acid, you're not using enough oxygen, so you're basically on the way to pain and stopping, because you've hit that point. And the higher you can get your aerobic threshold just by doing submaximal activity, then that means you can produce more power and speed and will find it easier exercise, and then that in turn will delay your anaerobic threshold. So that's why the base is there, and you can transfer around. It's why if you look at kids, the best things that I think kids can do is swimming to build up the aerobic base, and gymnastics, so they get to know their body, and which bit of their body is. I wish I'd done gymnastics. I had no idea what my arms and legs were doing. I grew pretty quickly, and then by that point I was like, okay, which arms do I? I had no coordination whatsoever. Whereas if I'd done gymnastics, okay, actually I can do this. You know what it's required in so many things. That if holding a crucifix, it was just impossible. Whereas if you're a kid and you start on a ramp and you do it like that, then there's little kids that can do it. You just.
But what James is describing there, which I think is interesting. So it's this view that sort of misguided view that we need to have specificity and something absolute specificity to do it. If the top of the triangle is the specificity, you're saying you spend so much time at the bottom doing stuff that's non-specific. And what he's describing there is exactly the same as the walking scenario. When you start to just walk when you're really unhealthy, you just get faster and faster. You just get your heart rate just starts to drop the more times you walk. So you have to walk faster and faster to get into the same heart rate zone. That's what happens. It's the same within the world of rowing or running or anything like that. And so if you'd always just maintained that 75% and were building conditioning within there, you're obviously dependent on volumes and stuff like that, then what happens is, what James is describing, that anaerobic threshold moves up. So if your 75% speed moves up, your 90% speed moves up.
Right.
Okay? And so without doing any 90% speed.
Yeah.
So it just naturally does that. So we do this with people all the time. And they'll come and say to me, right, so if we get them to jog on the treadmill and do like a 10-minute test, and when they get to 10 minutes, I'll have them built up to 75% of their max heart rate. And we hold them at that pace, and I'll take the speed of it, and they'll say, what does that mean? And I'll say, well, tomorrow you're going to the park run, you'll run 19:23. No, on the far 5K, fine. Go and they'll run 19:23, as long as they race it properly. Because that aerobic speed is so related to that top end speed once they're healthy, that it's the development of that becomes the absolute key and the protection of that. So if that's off, get it back, and then if you want to do something intense, do it.
Yep.
But it's an amazing monitoring tool, but it almost in every way reflects the same things if you're looking at health status.
Yeah.
So you're enhancing your physiology. See, so in all these physiological things, so it's again, as we age, you become less aerobic, your VO2 max drops,
Yeah.
you become poor aerobically.
Yeah.
So what should we do? Have a nice, simple, easy way to
Yeah.
maintain and develop your aerobic system, which keeps you more youthful. The same way as if you were doing all the other exercises mechanisms we talk about.
Yeah.
So how good is that to have that mechanism? You can make yourself at the higher end faster and fitter without actually having to stress yourself too much.
Yeah.
So that's the key.
I mean, James and I, we did the 4 marathons in 5 days, completely fasted, so not unfit. But I met you and you went, we worked maximum heart rate for me, 189, worked it back, so sitting between 140, 150. Well, when I went around my local park in Warwick and I was doing that for an hour, I'm running at like 13-minute miles, which is so slow, so slow. And you went, stick in there, I went, no, this is not doing any good at all. You went, it is. I went, no, it's not doing any good, honestly, mate. This is 13-minute miles. I know I can run 10-minute miles, then stick at it. Then the next week, after a few more runs, jogs, very slow jogs, 13 became 12, and a few weeks later, 12 became 11. Then I was getting under 11 a little bit. And then I'm in the 10s now. I'm still not below where I was before, but for the same amount of effort.
Amazing.
So at some point, I guess I'll be 9, hopefully, for the same amount of effort.
Exactly. But
therefore, proving you built the base.
So then would you have trusted that advice? It's coming from the person you trust makes a big difference. And so you obviously trust your Christians. They okay, I will stick at it. Whereas if it's someone else, you think, I used to be able to do it 5 minutes quicker per mile. Clearly, this isn't working. And in my training, our coach, we'd have a 4 years. So the Olympic cycle's 4 years, and under perfect conditions, he would set a time that he thought you would need to win a gold medal, which is a gold medal time, which is generally faster than the world record. And so everything was based, your speed was based a percentage of that gold medal time. So if you were doing, basically 2,000 metres, if you're doing a 20 kilometre session, it would be done generally around sort of 77% of the gold medal time. If you're doing a 500 metre time sprint, it would be done at 115%. That's the pace you have to hit. So because it is done A, by someone we trusted, and B, empirically written down as that's the speed, even if it felt slow, you think, well, that's the speed that's going to equate to that, and we trust him, he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah,
and if some muppet had come in and gone, well, you need to go really slow for 3/4 of what you're doing, you're going, no, now listen, this is not what you need.
So that's our challenge, James, is we're trying to get that across, that it's like to have, so we can actually prescribe that to people and let them know that's okay.
But when you can cut through all the BS that's out there and actually look in the literature, it's there, isn't it?
It's there.
A guy called Rich Roll, who ran, he's famous for doing 5 ultra marathons in 5 days on 5 different islands over in the Caribbean, like a super athlete. So he's already winning competitions and everything, and he took on a new coach, and the new coach did exactly what you said. Got to slow it down to this. And he went on, well, I don't want to do that. I want you to make me faster. Slow it down to this, and he did it, and then he became this.
Well, you're looking at longevity there again, though, as well. It's because anything that's intense, there's that volume sort of intensity there all the time. Now that's in an acute sense. You also have to look at that over someone's entire career as well, and also beyond their career. Let's say you take it past their career, and what's happened to them past their career and that as well. So, and I know it's obviously you're trying, if it's professional type athletics, then you're obviously trying to fit stuff in. But for most of us, it's the case of just trying to build those things up over a long time. So for someone like Rich Rowe, like you're saying there, he's looking at beyond, can I move on beyond? It was probably not possible to continue to maintain a certain level of intensity so high over longer time spells. If you were to take a bird's eye view of it and look at over 20 years, for example, you probably hit a wall at some stage. I've done interesting things like that myself, whereas I understand the way that most marathon runners train. And they tend to train in that middle zone of maybe between 80 and 90%, the zone that we try and keep out of all the time, as well as much as we possibly can.
The grey zone.
Yeah, it's right, exactly. Try and keep out of there, and that allows you to polarise your training a bit. It also allows you to build strength initially, which is really to spend time down there and to build some strength at the other end. But when you look through marathon runners, let's say you took all the marathon runners in Essex over the last 20 years, and you look at their times, what you tend to see is a little window of maybe 4 or 5 years, and then they disappear. And I think that's really interesting. This would be, say, vet athletes. They have a very short window where they can tolerate that, and then they can't do it anymore. They'll have injuries or just issues just even tolerating that, and lack of enjoyment, even if it was just something like that. And what you see is they just fall off the face of the earth. So my co-founder, Emil Prideaux at Zone 1 Health, she is a marathon runner who is obviously number one in UK over 45, let's say, but she's always racing against someone different because there's always someone else. So she'll stay in it for 10 years. The last 10 years, she's always there, but it's always someone new that's coming up to race you. Because of injuries and problems and issues. So people will hit a window and they think they've found it, but then it's only a short-term window.
Because they've not built the Zone 1 base.
Not built the base. And that's not, if you don't have the foundation, then and so what happens is, and also you've got nowhere to progress to either. Like how do you progress? An aerobic system is really good. You can really develop that. You can really build those physiological changes in the mitochondria, etc. You can really do that. So but you can't do it at the higher ones. It's kind of limited what you can do there.
But also touching on like carryover.
Yeah.
So there's a huge carryover from aerobic training into weightlifting because it builds that work capacity.
Agreed.
So that when you go into it, and this is what typically, I don't want to pigeonhole, but typically the guys at the gym that just want to get really, really big, you'll ask them and say, you're doing any sort of aerobic fitness? It'll be none.
Yeah.
They're doing no fitness whatsoever, no aerobic fitness whatsoever, just lifting weights. And I say to them, just focus on building this base, getting your heart rate within this zone, and that increases your work capacity so that when you lift weights, you need less rest, you can lift a little bit heavier, you can change the reps and the sets and all the rest of it. So
I totally agree with that. I actually see that in my own training. If I don't do any aerobic system work at all, my ability to pick things up that are heavy definitely suffers. But that's probably linked to energy production within the cell. If you looked at the mitochondria, for example, and they're the energy producing organelles within the cell, and they're obviously responsible for how we take in food and oxygen and then make energy in the form of ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, which will enhance obviously your ability to pick things up that are heavy. I just think the fact that if one great way of developing those mitochondria and what we call mitochondrial biogenesis, so you'll have more and larger mitochondria, is to do something aerobic. So just doing something aerobic that actually gets you into that zone and enhances that process, provides more energy from the cell, which will allow you to pick things up better. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the more of that you do, the better.
Agreed.
But there's certainly a certain amount that's definitely indicated in an ability just to have a general health status when you can actually do other things better. So it's so non-specific.
Such a carryover.
But there's a carryover, and I know that myself from my own training, which is really interesting.
And it has to be non-specific because aerobics for most individuals is totally different in the sense that for some people being at that 70 to 8% of max heart rate could be a slow-paced walk.
Yeah, it's right.
Some it could be a slightly faster-paced walk. Some it's a fast-paced walk after a meal wearing a coat. So you're warm, so your body's hot, and that's putting your heart rate up. It could be just walking. For some, it's jogging. For James, in his 78%, we look at him and go, he looks like he's sprinting, but he's actually still in
That's
is
right.
zone 1.
Still in
For
your zone,
others, it could
exactly.
be swimming, but then when you go non-impact, like your swimmings and your rowings, you've got to look at your heart rates because you're not weight bearing so much. A slower heart rate would still be that sort of same percentage of max, because the max in each sport is slightly different, isn't it?
That's
But
right.
and for others, I mean, I will sometimes, if I just don't feel like going outdoors and doing something, and I'm in my gym, I'll put my heart rate monitor on and I'll get into that zone just by doing quite quick reps, but lots of them.
Yeah.
Sometimes no weights on the bar, sometimes just the bar, and that still is an aerobic workout.
Yeah, it's right. So strength training can be quite a cardiovascular event.
And in some ways, you could argue that just breathing and living and sitting on the sofa is still aerobic, because you're pumping oxygen out to the muscles, which is what it's all about.
Yeah.
But we know the optimum is up in that 60
and that's what I'm saying.
70%.
It becomes about what we spoke about before. Would be like building a physiologic reserve almost. You're trying to almost, and there's an amount which you can enhance your physiology, which will obviously improve, like mean that you've got a younger physiology, so you're keeping yourself more youthful, especially for people who are getting older. And the longer that you can do that, you're building that. If you can maintain the aerobic system of someone that's 40 when you're 65, that's probably good.
Yeah.
You know, it's probably good. It's probably a good thing, and it's the same with your building strength. So if you've got those two things bubbling away, and you're lean, and you're eating well, and you've got those two things developing like that, then that's an anti-aging tool. It's a longevity tool right there. Yet the great thing about it is you never actually have to particularly work too hard.
Yeah.
And that's something that Emma Prideaux would say to me, is that she'd stand on the line for a marathon, and she would stand there and know that she was going to beat 90% of the females that were there. But it felt like she'd almost cheated her way there, because I said I haven't even hurt myself at all to be in this position. Yeah, I'm standing here and I just feel like I know how hard they've worked, and I definitely haven't had to do that. What they've done, you see.
So she's just done volume of light exercise.
Volume of light exercise, and again with really interesting experiments. We've done this with so let's say Emma's run, 10 sub 3 hour marathons within, let's say, a 7-year period or something like that. We've practiced doing 2 in 2 weeks and all this kind of stuff. But what's really interesting about it is that we've done it in all different ways, with slightly different volumes, but more the distribution of a given volume over the period of a week. So we have done things where she's done no long runs and all mid-pace runs, same run every day for 4 months, let's say, but the volume's the same. What happens? PB. You do big days, small days, same time. It's all about, ultimately, it's about developing the zone 1 in an appropriate manner. Because what you'll find is if you do a big day, you've got to make this like a high. You have to make the smaller day smaller. You know, and if you do a medium day, just keep the next day. So it all becomes about the general distribution of your training over the course of a time span, rather than about big day, small day. We stuck intensity in. Didn't make much difference. We didn't things like that. So it's an amazing thing. So ultimately, it's about getting enough in. It's about stress, about recovering, about adapting. There's loads of ways you can do it, but as long as you're looking at the aerobic system and keeping healthy and using it to track your health and your adaptation, what a health tool that is. And in the mornings, what we give to people a lot is to get them to go out, and if they can do this, but you can do it walking as well. We get them to do like what we call a 3-mile health check. So they go out for a jog in the morning, having had no food, so you can do it the same way each time. First thing they do, get up. They might have a cup of tea, but they just go and have go for a 3-mile jog. Come in, look at the speed, and look at the heart rate, and that gives you it's a brilliant little indicator of your health status on that day. Next day, you can just track that over time, and that's almost like that's your health check. It's a little health check. You can do it on the rower, you can do it on the walk-in. It's an amazing thing, so we can see the adaptations and decide when to do things.
I was going to say, the heart is such an accurate measure of your current health, because I'm always doing experiments for good and bad. You know, what happens if I eat this? What happens if I eat that? What happens if I drink this? What happens if I go to bed late? So I'm always doing all these experiments. And it's always reflected in the performance the next day. So get to the same heart rate, and it can be 20% faster, 20% slower, depending on all these other factors.
I tell you, things like alcohol, right? So someone's had a drink, they get up next, they come into me, and they'll say, right, I'm going out they go out for a run and they'll look at it, and I kid you not, some people can be something in the region of 2 minutes per mile slower for the same heart rate after a heavy night out.
Wow.
So you imagine they weren't tracking that. So imagine the stress. So they'll be up at 93% of their max heart rate out for a run
If they
the
weren't
day
tracking
after,
it, yeah,
if they
yeah.
weren't tracking it.
Yeah.
And they just went out for a run at a pace rather than
Yeah.
actually having a look at that.
Yeah.
And that's when people land in problems. You know
Yeah.
people can get issues with that, but not. And even if they didn't, they're just adding stress onto stress. So you just got to be so careful. You need to try and regulate that somehow. So once they learn that, and also what maybe makes them do is maybe think about whether it's a good idea to even train, or certainly to have too much to drink.
The heart is so accurate at identifying the stress you're putting on the body that when we're doing our 500 kilometers bike ride, 5 days no food, we had to stay at a certain heart rate, or certainly I did. I mean, this guy just goes off and he's just brilliant, but it's superhuman.
You
But
can go max all
for
day.
me, I'm going to get to the end by just sitting at that heart rate, because then I'm only going to burn body fat. And yet, I'd look down and my heart rate would be going up, and I'm going, why is that going up? That shouldn't be going up. I've not changed anything. I look at my altimeter and I'm going up a hill that I can't see with my eyes. Yeah. But my body can feel it.
Incredible, isn't it?
It's just
incredible,
phenomenal.
Yeah, a lot of the training we'll do to keep in a zone, for example, we'll even have like an elite athlete when they get to, they'll just walk up it.
Yeah.
They'll just walk up it. If it's a steep hill, they'll just walk up it.
I still do that.
Yeah, because on that day, we're just trying to keep them in a. So just say, just slow it. It doesn't matter. Just like on today you don't need it. Yeah. You know, we can do it on another day. You can open up it if you like on another day, but today we're keeping as much as we can that stress low and develop that system down there and recover.
I want to bring it in a minute back to helping those who are just starting out, but we just talked about coaching marathon runners. James coached the Cambridge boat race team last year. Do you do a lot of aerobics, only one, keeping them down at train, getting that volume?
Yeah, I mean that's the I guess the difficulty and beauty of rowing, that when you're in the boat together, it's everyone's doing the same session at the same. Everyone has to be the same intensity because of the way the boat feels. But once they're on the row machine, on land individual, then they'll have their own target splits of what they've got to do. But then the reality is it's a 8-month program from September, October through to April. Is that then they're still student athletes, so they've got to balance the fact that they've meeting at 6 a.m. every day. They've also got college work to do, and they're 20-year-old kids. They've got student life as well, and you're balancing all that. And then certain periods they've got hands some work in they've avoided doing for the whole term. So you've got all these balls to juggle, and you don't, on top of the normal, relationship issues, whatever other things that are not looking after themselves, eating like a student but training like a full-time athlete and trying to learn something. So it's actually, you can control one aspect, but you need to factor in that it's often the first time they've away from home.
Yeah.
So, and the reality is that, I would say to them, is that there's a meet at 6 a.m. and it was like, if we wait for you once, we'll always wait for you. So the guys have come down, the minibuses have gone. And I go, look, it takes no natural talent to get an alarm clock. Natural talent will come later, but being here on time, that's not natural talent, that's getting out of bed. And so there's all these things that you've got to build in, and then part of that is then learning how to factor that in with the training program, and then as a coach, you've got to understand and read into how an athlete's do. Sometimes you do need to be flexible with the program rather than say, okay, you are doing this. You've only got to say, okay, are they? And then it comes to knowing the person. Yeah. Are they a lazy arse, or are they the ones that are just going to hammer and need to be pulled back? So it's a whole lot more to it.
It's really interesting that, because it's about this kind of stress capacity that people have got. Everybody's slightly individual, and those other parts of life that James is talking about, absolutely essential. We see this a lot with especially younger athletes who are under pressure in numerous domains in their life, even if it's just from an academic perspective. It massively impacts on their sport. That's why it's really handy to be able to monitor it sometimes for them, because it does have a huge impact, and it's almost about how much of this entire stress capacity they've got left to train. You know, so what have you got left? What are you dedicating to this?
Yeah.
If you go to the Olympics, right, and you're sat in your room every day, all day, 99% of your entire life is training and resting and eating. It's like there's nothing else you're doing. I went to the World Cup. It's all you do. Like you just train twice a day, and the rest of the time, all you're doing is preparing to train again. You know, you can devote literally the entire as part of your life to that. In the real world, it's very different to that. So an appreciation of that is, that's what James is talking about there. People like students and student nights and all that. It just depends how much you've got left to give, and it's an understanding of what other things do for those athletes or people.
Yeah.
It can be really handy. So to have a tracking system it can be really handy, you know, because you can see what it's doing.
Well, let's do that. Let's go right back to the basics then. So we talked about coaching marathon runners, talked about coaching rowers. Let's go right back to basics. Somebody's just starting. You mentioned earlier on that a good aerobic base underpins all the other aspects like the movement, the stance, and certainly resistance training. How does somebody consciously start to look at aerobic training? I mean, is the first thing to always go and get the best heart rate monitor you can get, whether it be the heart rate, the belt, or the watch, or where do we start?
Not necessarily. Not from well. In fact, they don't need any device really. We don't think they've just got to walk. I mean, that's the main thing, to get outside and to start to think about walking. But also to do other kind of movements as well will enhance a lot of the movements we've actually talked about, the strength movements, posture movements, etc. They'll work your aerobic system as well, and to really focus on your nutrition, because your body composition is essential in all this. Is to optimize your body composition so as that. And before you, even just for the same intensity of exercise or same speed at which you're walking, if you are in a slightly better body composition, let's say your body fat's slightly lower, your viscous fat's slightly lower, or you've just got a slightly higher lean body weight to weight ratio or something like that, you will just move faster for a given heart rate. So this is part of this general condition. Everything's bubbling away together.
We just trying to get people. James said that earlier about the difference running a marathon a stone lighter in years when you're a stone lighter than heavier. Just everything's so much easier.
Yeah, I think it does. It's one of the Christian talk then. It's so much easier when you're a full-time athlete and it's your priority. When you're talking then about what to set out, how you're going to do it. I think that what I would encourage people to do is, why do you want to make these changes? Be really honest. If it is, I want to look better, then that changes your approach to it, because I want to be healthier, I want to enjoy my kids' lives and their kids' lives, whatever reason. And then look at your life and then think, well, what have I got time to make the differences? And okay, I have time on this day, then we're planning a longer walk. And I've got no time on this day, then focus on what you're going to eat. If you haven't got time to exercise, then focus on what goes in.
Spot on.
And
that's exactly what we do.
then the other thing I would really, a real key part of it is actually verbalise your intentions. Tell someone else, because once you've articulated it out loud, you've almost made a promise to yourself and someone you love or respect or a mate. They'll be going, I thought you were going to do that. Yeah. And you put pressure on yourself to do it by actually telling someone and making it an audible statement. You're more likely to stick it in, and then also try and drag a mate into doing it or a family member to do it with you. My old man walks 10,000 steps a day now because mum makes him. Yeah. His choice would not be to do that, but he's actually benefiting from it.
I think it's that level of accountability, isn't it? I think we're all, as you just touched on, we're all looking for community, and a goal shared is a goal halved completely. But it's about sort of, as James just touched on, reverse engineering your program around your lifestyle and how busy you are.
Reverse engineering, see, that I like that term. That's a good
just
word.
Just sprung to mind. And then from there, you can formulate the best plan of action to, I have X amount of time to be able to do 1 or 2 of these ones a week, and then my 2 or 3 straight training sessions on top of that. But you've got to figure out how much time you have first, because that's what everyone's struggling with. Yeah. We all don't have much time. We're poor. We're time poor. And everyone's really, really stressed, and so it's just reverse engineering, I think.
And then writing in your diary as well, so that actually, so once you've written in your diary, in the same way you won't miss an appointment on other things. Actually, once you've written it down, you're like, oh yeah, I've got to do that. Yeah. Then you kind of made the double commitment then.
Yeah.
I think that's where the Health Result app comes in as well, because you can keep scoring it. You get your daily score, your monthly score, and you want to see that going in the right direction. But you're right. You say we're time poor, but we're time poor maybe because, like James said, if we haven't got our why right, we might think we've got no time because we think we've got no time, but we're still giving up 4 hours a day to watch the telly because we haven't understood why we want to get healthy.
And like you said, if you make it too intense, less natural to just go out and do it comfortably, people are more likely to maybe put it off.
Yeah.
And what I'll do is, I tend to do is I'll sit people down exactly as James said there, look at the week and I'll say, let's split the week into 14 parts, twice a day. And they'll go, twice a day? So no, I'm going to make it so there is 2 opportunities a day to move. Which ones do you think we'll do? Let's talk through your week. See, there's a morning, there's an evening time. Which one? Let's have a look.
Of choice.
Then they start to put in little bits of where they've got time and letting them see there's actually more opportunities in the day than you think. That little TV time that James is talking about there, where you'll sit and watch maybe that's when you should take the dog out. Or do something else. So you just split it into those, look at your week, there it is, and then you can just start to have a look and see whether it's doable over time.
Yeah. You might want to edit this bit out, but when I was injured, I had to do nothing for a week. And our coach came up and goes, you're going to watch TV? I go, yeah, watch a film this afternoon. He said, every 5th minute, hold your breath for a minute. For the whole film. Yeah. And it's actually... okay, it's just things you're not used to doing. Actually, you just practice it. You think, hold your breath for
Yeah.
And actually, you just realize, you actually get better at it.
That's what we talk about building exercise.
So it's not the best thing, I'm not advising it, but it's actually just over focusing on your body.
Yeah. That's so true. I think it's about building, I don't know if any of you've read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, about building, often I think stacking good intentions onto habits that we're already doing, such as when you brush your teeth in the morning, stand on one leg to practice, and you do that twice a day without fail because you brush your teeth in the morning, brush your teeth at night. It's about stacking really good intentions and good habits onto habits that you're already doing is a real sure way to just make it part of your life, isn't it?
I do that with nose breathing. So making sure you breathe through your nose again. Nitric oxide is formed within the nasal passages. That will enhance your aerobic system. There's no doubt about it. So spend some time, even when you walk, it's a chance to nose breathe, really, when you walk. It's when you're doing some posture work, it's a chance to nose breathe. Just take, like James is saying there, it's a chance to hold your breath. It's time to just some sort of stress or some sort of physiological adaptation you're looking for there. So just use it for that. Because great literature on things like yoga and meditating and all that, but there's a lot of breathing involved in those types of activities through the nose. So perhaps it's your blood pressure regulation, etc. is coming from something physiological like that. So do it. And you can get an aerobic enhancement from actually breathing properly.
So
I read a really interesting book from a chap called Patrick McKeown.
Oxygen Advantage. I did a podcast with him. Brilliant.
Really?
Brilliant.
I remember going out for my first walk and I sort of taped the mouth. And I was so shocked at how hard it was to just nasal breathe. This is until I learnt to nasal breathe. But
so I had him coach me, and we ended up for about 3 months sleeping with tape around here. Called it Myo tape, so that when you're asleep, you've got a hole. So if you've had to, you could open, but tape around here, so you're having to breathe at night in and out of the nose. Game changer. Much better sleep, feeling better, more energy. Just breathing properly.
Did you get better at playing the nose flute as well?
Probably. I haven't tried
busking in your Peruvian outfit with a bit of nose flute.
I haven't tried that one yet. But if you haven't seen that, read that book, there's 2 great ones. One called Breathe, can't remember the author of that one, but Oxygen Advantage by Patrick is brilliant. Really brilliant. And again, building into your daily life, standing on one leg, brushing your teeth. Richard Branson will not have a meeting unless he has to, unless he's walking.
Right.
So he won't sit in the office and have it. Well, let's go and walk.
Right.
You're thinking better, you're walking, you're talking, you're outdoors. And what difference does it make whether you're sitting in an office or walking?
That's right.
So that's great, guys. And again, back to just very, very quickly, and let's finish on this then. Why Zone 1 when lots of people these days have all, you know what it's like with the internet, somebody says something and then everybody copies it, and now there's like a Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3. What you're calling Zone 1 quite a lot of others now calling zone
two.
3 or zone 2, zone 3.
Yeah.
You've told me this once before. I think it's so that everybody can exercise in this amount. I think, zone 1 for others, for some people, they're doing that when they're asleep. Zone 2, if you're really just starting out at exercise, that might be why you're sitting there having your breakfast. So I think you wanted to make it all-encompassing, didn't you?
It is. Well, what we've found is that there is an optimal intensity at which you can develop your aerobic system. Okay, and we're looking the way that we think we've found that ideal place, and where we're trying to get people to is because it seems to relate to every other thing that they do and intensity they do in their life, and it also links in with all the literature on where the adaptations would come to things that would promote, say, longevity or disease prevention and things like that, or immune function and that sort of thing. So what we see is, as soon as people get to roundabout or have an ability to actually move at 75% of their aerobic heart rate, 75% of their max heart rate, and that relates exactly to other things that they do, then it's like a game changer for them. That you really are in a position where they're disease-free, they're injury-free, they've got no issues and stuff like that. So what we're saying is, and the best way to develop that seems to be to spend a lot of time at it. It's also an intensity where you can talk, move, and you can build up huge volumes there. So again, it heaps back into this like aerobic human movement. We would just evolve to move every day and do things for a long time span every day. And as soon as you start to up the intensity from there, you just find that it becomes fatiguing, and you have to drop down the amount you do and rest more.
Yeah.
So there's a little sweet spot there, but there is a bit of a journey to get there. So for example, a lot of people, let's say your zone 1 heart rate is 140 beats per minute, okay? You might initially start off at 80% of your max heart rate, which will be like 150 beats per minute, because it's almost impossible for you to move unless you actually can go up to those. And you might even be higher than that. You might be 90%, but you're up at 170 or something, right? Because you're just walking at that. But as you start to get going, what happens is that heart rate will drop, and you'll then be sitting at somewhere around 75% even when you're walking, and it will start to drop lower than that. Then you've got a decision to make. You can be quite happy just walking and you never quite reach it, or you might think, do you know what? To get that added little aerobic system development, I'll just maybe start to jog. Yeah. I'll maybe start to move, or I might go on the row machine, do a little bit more or something. So you can actually spend more time. You initially would walk for 30 minutes at that heart rate. Eventually you're walking for 30 minutes that's too low, and then so you decide, well, okay, and then one day you're running at 30 minutes at that heart rate. Yeah. It's a similar physiological effect. You're continually hone your physiology, you're getting fitter and stronger, and as we spoke about earlier, what you're doing is you're enhancing all the maximal paces above that, sub-maximal paces above that, which is creating a bigger physiologic reserve. So it's almost like acts as an anti-aging tool, because the higher your reserve is, the more youthful you more likely are. So there you go. It's disease prevention, illness prevention, that sort of thing. And you'd never have to push too hard. So it's a no-brainer, really.
At a zone where it's comfortable, enjoyable, and if you had to go and do it again later that day or tomorrow, you'd feel okay doing it. Yeah. And that means that you can do more time in that zone. It builds resistance to illness. It doesn't cause loads of cortisol, loads of inflammation.
No, none.
Supports autophagy.
It's the opposite. Yes, autophagy is a massive one. Yeah.
Again, if you go too high, you can't get into autophagy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you go too high, obviously autophagy is the body's self-renewal system. It's like autophagy. It's like self-eating. The cells almost like use their own constituents to heal and sometimes they decide to almost die because they can't heal properly. But in a sense, you end up with this beautiful sort of physiology and cells that are just in an optimal state. But what we see with if you exercise too hard, and this is what we see in a lot of these top athletes who are very, very overtrained, is that a step on from autophagy, which is cell renewal, is apoptosis, which is cell death. So too high intensity training leads to more cell death. So you almost go past the stage of autophagy and into that. And so that's when you see this weakening of athletes when they come in. So that's what we see. And what you do is you then slow them down to recover them to make them faster.
Yeah.
So you get this beautiful autophagy, and everyone just and that's like an optimal intensity for it. We just see that with our own eyes. Also allows you to train strength on the other end, which I think is a major thing.
Yeah.
That's called polarization of your training.
Yeah.
The easy stuff's easy, and you allow the harder stuff to be hard.
That's a great place to end aerobics. I think we've touched on a lot of different things there, and I hope everybody watching got something out of that. Thanks, gents.